What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor. It's time to get your true crime fill with Fil and Gil, except Gil is getting too big for his own britches. So once again, Scott Duffy is filling in. It's a show so good that we bring it to you live every Friday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Get your questions and comments in. We're going to be talking about Kohberger, but as you know, Detective Phil Waters, Magnum PI, wishes he could be Phil. That's what I found out. Phil is the real life Magnum PI. He spent decades in law enforcement, became an expert at obtaining criminal confessions, 23 years as a homicide detective in the Houston PD, investigating more than 400 homicide cases. He's also a Marine, by the way, and the owner of Kindred Spirits Investigations, and starred in the show The Interrogator. Agent Scott Duffy is director of Wilmington University's Criminal Justice Institute. He's a retired FBI special agent out of Delaware. He worked violent crime matters, gangs, bank robberies, and fugitive task force cases for 20 years. Prior to the FBI, he served 5.5 years as a Pennsylvania police officer. The usual. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We are at Podcast STS. And please support us on Patreon. And also, you can get a YouTube subscription. And as my 7 and 8-year-old daughters say, please subscribe and hit the like button. It gets the algorithm chugging. Where is everyone? I think the Super Bowl weekend is here and people are slacking. But there is news to catch up on today regarding Brian Kohberger. And Phil, I think you're going to find some of this interesting. So News Nation has actually been doing some reporting on this. They spoke with a source close to DM, one of the surviving roommates. Now, News Nation was using her name. Before we get into anything, Phil, how do you feel about using victims' names in general? Should we not be doing it? Because I have used the full name on air, and I got a ton of hate mail. And you know what? I thought about it, and I thought, they're right. I should be using initials. But what say you as a veteran homicide detective?
Well, in regards to DM, she's a witness. So that, for me, makes a distinction between her and Kaylee and Madison and Ethan and Zana, because they were the victims. So I think their names should be used at every occasion to keep them up front and in focus regarding what happened to them as a matter of respect for them and their families. Regarding the witnesses, whether it's DM or whoever it may be, I think there is always a folly in talking about witnesses by name. And I know hers is out there, but the problem is for me is that and as it has happened in this case, it brings a torrent of critical, negative, in my judgment, defamatory comments toward this particular young lady, and I think that is an injustice toward her. I think people need to quit speculating about what we know. And when I talk about what we know, it's coming from the affidavit for the search warrants and arrest warrants. So it's kind of a mixed bag here. My response to you, Joel, I think where witnesses are concerned, I think talking to them by name, I think that is, and it could damage the investigation later on. Mm-hmm. So I think mentioning witnesses by name, I think that's something that should not happen. But the victims themselves should be mentioned at every occasion. And of course, in this particular case, which I will not mention the evildoer's name. Now, I have had cases where people were murdered, but I would not apply the label of evil to what happened. So, but in this particular case, I think it is most appropriate.
And that is why we will stick with DM here when speaking about one of the two surviving roommates. And as I was saying, News Nation with Ashley Banfield did some reporting on this last night, and it's pretty interesting, Scott. According to these reports, the surviving roommate, DM, allegedly thought that the noise resulted from partying, therefore asking the victims to quiet down, asking Kaylee and Maddie and the others to quiet down, and mistook the killer as a guest. A source exclusively told News Nation. Ashley Banfield went on to say that the source got this information directly from DM. I can tell you, I have been in media for 27 years, and I never really trust these types of reports. A single source claims to have gotten it directly from surviving roommate. Phil is shaking his head in a little bit of disgust. But if this is true, and she thought the noise resulted from partying, what is your initial reaction to hearing this?
So I would agree with you both that you have now sources, media sources, whatever have you, going out trying to find any witness that's already been interviewed by law enforcement, and trying to stir up a story, trying to stir up contradictory information to that which is in the affidavit and so forth. So I would concur. Why give it further credence, right? It's this witness and any other witness, possibly unnamed, not mentioned in the affidavit, will be in the courtroom and hopefully corroborating what has been already said, my guess, on record, as opposed to through a media source. It would be different, I think, if a member of the media had actually interviewed the victim and it was either on camera or something different, other than saying a source. So it's third party information, right? It's hearsay, and it's contradictory. Nobody ever likes to see any contradiction to the evidence, but since it's a source and an unnamed source, well, I would leave it at that.
And it's interesting you say that, because I was laying in bed, for full disclosure, not paying 100% attention. And if I recollect correctly, they sort of teased up the story as though Ashley had this firsthand information, and I don't want to begrudge what they're trying to do. But again, I'm skeptical about it. It sounds like, Phil, you might be skeptical too. But while we're on the topic here, according to this source, DM allegedly first heard noises around 4 a.m. and according to the source, opened her door and yelled, "Calm down, you're being loud, and I'm trying to sleep." This goes totally counter, Phil, to what we learned in the probable cause affidavit, where the witness, quote unquote, stood in a frozen shock phase. What do you make of this report, if anything?
Well, I think it is sensationalism at its best. I think, I don't know, Joe, you would speak to this better than I just know that when I've dealt with media in 23 years working homicides, that I would caution those folks and I knew a lot of these reporters off camera. So when they would come to me, and in typical fashion, they would come to me first and say, "Hey, we're hearing this. You want to check this out?" So forth and so on. And then I would do that. And to me, when we hear these sources, there's no corroboration for what they're saying. There's no verification that these sources are in fact credible and reliable. So anytime something like this comes out, I question the source to begin with. If this isn't just somebody out there that is trying to stir it up again, by putting something out there that sounds, given the circumstances as we know them, it sounds reasonable. It sounds like that's something she might have said, but I don't know that. And just because we've got some person that claims that they have spoken with her directly, and now they're putting this out, I would, if she has spoken to one person, and let's just say for the sake of the discussion, has shared that with them, and then they turned right around and gave it to journalists or these quasi-journalists, then I would suggest to her that she find another friend. That person's not to be trusted. And so you always go back, why in the world would they put something like that out if not for, just as you said, just to keep something stirred up all the time? Because look at, here we are today, and what are we talking about?
Yeah,
some unnamed source that put out something. Nobody knows if it's credible. Nobody's corroborated it, but we're putting it out there, and now we're sitting here discussing it. So,
and that's sort of the unfortunate cycle. First of all, just to get back to what you were saying regarding me, just generally speaking, the rule's always at least two sources, never a single source. Also, this business of just anonymous sources, you just never know. And an anonymous source that personally knows DM, I'm not gonna. Who knows who actually knows? She's been in the business a long time, and it may well be true, but it is, even her own reporter, Brian Enton, was questioning it because it doesn't make sense in relation to the probable cause affidavit. And Scott, to you, the same thing I just asked Phil. In that probable cause affidavit, we are told that she was in a frozen shock phase, which makes a lot of sense if 4 people are basically bludgeoned to death in very close proximity to you. But now, hearing this, calm down, you're being loud, and I'm trying to sleep, the two just don't jive together. Is your tendency to just ignore this report and stick to the PCA?
Yeah. So any statement that is taken from anybody that can offer something valuable to an investigation, it goes into a police report. There's more than likely, because of the severity of this crime, that the individual, any other potential witness, gives a recorded statement and is doing it not in the hallway or in the bedroom of that house, but in a secure and a good area where there is probably a very lengthy interview and statement given to the police, and that's what they have to go on. You could, that statement itself, frozen. That the affiant, the one who wrote the affidavit, the detective, he's just using a few pieces of information in order to assist in creating just the bare minimum facts of an affidavit. So there is a very lengthy, my guess, interview of this individual, and all of that might have been added in. We don't know, right? Only because of what we know in the affidavit. And when all the totality of everything that is said is put together, it could be that if this statement were true, that the other statement is just as true. And when you see it all together, they balance themselves out, as opposed to one piece of information in affidavit and then another piece of an unidentified source who's simply trying to contradict and create some controversy still early in this investigation.
First comment of the day here from Elser1. So many people have Idaho derangement syndrome. It's just crazy. I guess we're guilty of that at the moment. Then Carson writes, these are new names. I love it. Victims' names should remain anonymous unless their identity is pertinent in understanding the case. That sounds like what the great Phil Waters just said. And Phil, I assume we will find out who is right, the source or the affiant, as Scott just mentioned, when we get to trial time. Is that right?
Oh yeah, and I would Scott, hit the nail on the head with his comments. The statement that was taken from the witness, whether it was a written statement or whether it was a videotape statement or an audio tape statement, is of course going to be much more extensive and broader based than just the couple of paraphrased statements that were made in the affidavit. And we don't know at what part of that statement that those, if they were made, if they were entered into. Now, and to answer your question, yes, this is all evidence. And these are things that will be revealed if this thing goes to trial. And so to release statements, I guess this is kind of one of these things, and the media has done this for years, where there are some statements of fact, but they are not revealing the truth. So they're saying some things that are factual, but it does not tell the truth about the entire statement or the conversation. So again, these kinds of things being leaked out, of course, the defense is going to get all of this stuff in totality. They're not getting these pieces. So the defense is going to get everything in its proper context, and then they're going to take it and they're going to manipulate it however they think they can to provide a defense for the evildoer. So, it's kind of frustrating. I'm sure the detective, and look, the judge has a gag order on this thing, and yet you've got people that, for whatever reason, want their 15 minutes of what they think is fame by sending this thing out and getting on the interwebs here and going, look, I'm the one that did that. Who knows?
And Phil, speaking of that gag order, I'm glad you brought it up because I actually forgot to put it in my notes, but I know I read about this. The media as a whole is basically petitioning, I think, the
judge,
the judge to remove the gag order. What do you think of that from your perspective as an investigator?
I think the judge implementing the gag order, if it's going to be the same judge that implemented this thing, my question was, when she did it, was, why did you wait this long? And I now see where the attorney, this mouthpiece for the Goncalves family, now he is doing the same thing. He wants the gag because he wants to get up and talk. Well, I just don't think that this goes to the good of the case. I don't think it doesn't enhance the prosecution and hopefully what will be a successful prosecution of this case to have a bunch of lawyers that are hired by families to get up and start running their heads. And I'm sorry, but I think people need to have a little self-control, and we've got the guy, we've got him charged. If he has not been, he's going to get indicted and he's going to go to trial. Now, this thing that's going to happen, I think, in June, I don't know that that's going to be the start of the trial. That may be that's the next hearing in the process. This is where things slow down in the process. Now, he's granted under the Sixth Amendment a speedy trial, but he can waive that. And most of the time, it is waived. The speedy trial portion is waived so that the defense can build up their defense as needed. So I'm thankful for the gag order, and the media clamoring for something, wanting her to remove it, I think is irresponsible. And I think that's where journalism, and Joey, you can speak to these better than I, and I know in my dealings with media at the local and national levels, there was a time when there was a more respectful, controlled search for the truth by journalists. Now it just seems to be they're just sensationalists running around out here trying to find the latest piece of crap that we can throw on the wall and see if it sticks and for how long it's going to stick. And I think that is disappointing to me to see that progression.
And it's all, I think it's all exacerbated by the advent of technology too. Social media makes all the media outlets feel like they have to compete that much more, even with programs like this. And this is why I try to be careful and rely on the guests and not myself for the information, because you guys are the experts. I'm always going to take a comment from Jersey Girl, even with a Z in Jersey. You have to take it with a grain of salt, she says, until it all goes to trial. But to you, Scott, I'm curious to get your take. When you're working a big or a high-profile case, how frustrating is that juxtaposition between the work you're trying to do and the work the media is trying to do in terms of getting the story out there? And look, I've been on the inside of the media train, and there's tremendous pressure on reporters, on anchors to get a story, to keep a story like Kohberger going. The ratings on Kohberger are amazing. Anytime they do an hour with exclusive information on News Nation, I'm sure their numbers are much higher than when they don't. So there's pressure there. But how frustrating is it to you, who are actually working the case, when the media has a tendency to do this?
Oh, it can be very frustrating, but I think, like Phil, I too, having worked my whole career in Delaware, I had good friends in the media, and just like I had good friends in many different areas of where my investigation may go, I would rely upon these friends and these experts to kind of help guide as we move forward. So if I was part of a case that had a lot of local news attention or whatnot, it's important for me to give everything to so every agency has a press information officer, public information officer, keeping them in the loop. And these are experts that have been hired to help bridge that gap, so to speak, between the investigators, witnesses, who's ever integral to the investigation, and then the need to know, right? The public wants to know, and they want to know now, and so there's that constant fight and balance between providing information and then holding on to information, anything that can be used or threatened or go after the integrity of the evidence, et cetera, before a courtroom, right? So I would utilize my sources in the media just as sources utilize or media utilizes their sources in investigations. And if I had seen something that I might have said, all of a sudden gotten out, and I'd be like, okay, perhaps I have to be more careful of who my friends are. But it ordinarily, the media has a right to know certain things, and this, like any other case like this, gets a lot of attention, and you're trying to always be the first to go and get new information, as opposed to just kind of hashing out some of the specifics and educating the public to why things are or why things aren't in a case, and kind of giving them enough just to balance that I want to know more, and trial is not going to be for another 6 months to a year. So it is a fight. It is a good and sometimes frustrating, but at the same time, I've had good sources that help me understand what absolutely can get out there, and then try to give little tidbits just to keep the public happy.
And Phil, I think if I remember correctly, you said the same thing. You had a few journalists, a few TV reporters that you would kind of be your go-to people if you needed to get information to the public. Is that right?
Yeah, we had a great relationship, and we would trade off. I've had reporters at scenes where I have been out doing a canvass in the neighborhood and they've called me on my phone and said, look, the mother of the victim just showed up at the scene. We just thought we'd let you know. And I would go back to the scene and get with that family member and then have a conversation with them. So yeah, I had a good working relationship with reporters in Houston, and they knew, I mean, they're reporters, so they would always throw the question out there that they knew I wasn't going to answer. But I think you've already said it. They're doing their job, and that's fine. And it becomes kind of sometimes it becomes kind of a fencing match. You know, you kind of parry and strike and that kind of thing. So, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the interaction, and it was always a lot of fun. So, but I had a good relationship, and I cannot think of one that ever broke that confidence between us. We always had that, and it helped me, because sometimes I would get information from them that they had gone out. You know, they go out and they knock on doors and they're looking for people to stick a microphone in their face, that kind of thing. And sometimes they would come up with a witness that was unknown at the time, but then that's somebody that I can go and have a conversation with. So it is a back and forth. And in my experience, it was always a good one. But the things that I'm saying now, and I think you're right, the advent of social media has just turned people into kind of mind-numbed robots, and it's all about clicks.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear you had a good relationship. Pointer Lover here says, I wish people would leave DM and BF alone, the two surviving roommates. I'm sure they're also dealing with survivor's guilt on top of everything else. Scott, to you, you know, you're intimately involved in your cases. There are survivors at times. How do you think, I mean, in general, what is it like from your perspective, to survive a hideous crime? And what do you think they might be going through right now? Is it survivor's guilt? Is it feeling like maybe I shouldn't have been the one that made it through? It's got to be super tough on these people.
I totally agree with that, Joel. You know, not only victims of a crime, but just imagine any tragedy where, you know, it is inches or seconds before somebody, you know, where somebody dies or is seriously injured, and somebody right next to them or within seconds or inches is alive. So it all comes down to timing and place, et cetera, et cetera. And I go through great lengths to protect the victims in my cases, and at the same time having our victim coordinator, right? In the FBI, every division has a victims coordinator, and we speak to them on a daily basis. These are some highly educated social workers with great backgrounds, indebted to our victims. So where I can then move on as an investigator and continue to gather evidence and do lots of interviews, the victim coordinator can now kind of hold their hand, so they're never forgotten, even if I'm not in daily contact. So that relationship with the agency and our victims and our witnesses that are traumatized by any investigation we're conducting is so important to maintain, not only through this lengthy process, because it is a year, 6 months, whatever it is going to be to trial. That's a tremendous amount of weight for any victim to carry on their shoulders, and I've become aware of that throughout my career. When I could say early on, I might have made a few missteps, but you quickly learn, and especially when you realize the resources you have, and those resources are doing their best to carry that victim through, or those victims through, to the end, and then of course, well after the trial, their job's not over at a guilty or acquittal or whatever the conclusion of a court case is. They sometimes it's a lifelong relationship where you might get a phone call or an email just thinking about you or whatnot, and that happens still to this day for me. 5 years retired.
Yeah, and we had the infamous serial killer BTK's daughter on, Carrie Rawson, and she talks very openly. 18 years after her dad was arrested, she's still obviously traumatized and does not think it's ever going to go away, which makes sense, but she's trying to adapt. And she's in my thoughts a lot because she occasionally will send me or tweet out hate mail that she gets, and she doesn't deserve that. She's not her dad, which is terrible. Salt phone here, and this is interesting in light of kind of pivoting to the next subject area. She writes, Phil, and I don't know if this is true, so I'm curious to get your take here. Any prior bad acts, like previous murders from Kohberger, would likely not be admissible in a trial for his current charges. This sounds a bit like Kohberger saying, did you arrest the others? I'm not sure if I fully understand this question, but the reason I pivoted to this is Pennsylvania authorities are now reportedly looking at cold cases. He was at Northampton Community College, DeSales University. The Northampton, which is that area, County District Attorney Terrence Houck told the Seattle station, keep in mind he was going to school in Washington State, he said, your natural question is to start wondering, is this guy wanted? Phil, it sounds like they are looking, and he had no criminal record previously, but they are looking at potential cold cases. That sounds like standard operating procedure, but hypothetically, they find out, let's say he did kill someone, that would not be allowed to be brought into this trial. Is that accurate?
I'm not sure what the rules of evidence are in Idaho. I know that in Texas, I would doubt very seriously that kind of thing would be allowed in the trial. It would be something if he was found guilty and go to punishment, and then all of those things would be brought in punishment. But I think in terms of what they're doing, this looking at other cold cases, so forth and so on, that's just due diligence for the scope of the investigation. So I don't find anything particularly enlightening about that. They're doing what they should be doing. And I would just be very skeptical that he's got some other stuff in his background because of the way this one was carried out. I had so many mistakes that were made, and it just looked like just beginner mistakes if he was going to go down this path. So I not to say that there's not, I'm just saying that I would be, given what we know, given what I know, I would just be skeptical that they're going to find any other homicides related to this particular evildoer.
This next comment comes from Michael Connolly, who wrote the TV show. I'm not saying this is him. Same name as the guy who wrote Bosch, the detective show on Amazon, which I love because it's about guys like Phil Waters, cool dudes living a cool life. Bosch was a homicide detective in LA, and it was written by, I believe, a guy named Michael Connolly. But Scott, to you, Michael Connolly, if he did write Bosch, and this is the same guy, come on my podcast, but how accurate are cell tower pings? State records show only 3 towers in Moscow. More towers equal more accurate. Wondering if the defense could muddy the waters with BK, Brian Kohberger, living and working within a 10-minute radius. We've heard this before. Small area, few towers. Is it something that the defense is going to use, as Michael says, to muddy the reasonable doubt waters?
Well, just taking that information with regards to state records show 3 towers. There could be additional towers that are not listed. It's sure, anytime you have a lot more towers, you're going to have a lot more information, but there are very good experts in the FBI that I would imagine are offering their resources here. And to be able to what they've already been able to do in an affidavit, or at least listed in the affidavit, provide some very good information, placing his phone in certain areas and then going back to those areas and gathering additional information such as surveillance video from different businesses alike. So I mean, I've used these experts in quite a few cases, especially in the last few years of my career, and they know what they are talking about, and they go through tremendous education and training with regards to being able to read these towers, being able to provide information, getting very close to where they need those, putting that phone in a very specific spot. So, yeah, of course, the more towers, the better. But I would imagine the towers that are in place and any other towers not listed within the state records have been located and used. And it's amazing where cell towers are. They're not just towers standing alone. They're on schools. They're in wooded areas. They're just it's amazing, especially when you're talking about two universities not far from each other. So yeah, anything can be used to muddy the waters, but a good expert is going to be able to hold a light to the candle.
So Snake Plissken, nice name, writes, the media is never my friend. I would never, ever speak to them. I do have to say the media does an incredibly important job. My mother here, her father was killed in Auschwitz, and without proper media, atrocities and other horrible bad acts would largely go unnoticed, as is happening or not happening because of the media in Ukraine right now. So the media plays an important role. Can they be a pain in the ass? Yes. Can we be wrong 100% of the time? I would not say the media is never my friend. Would I speak to them right after a loved one was killed? My wife and I, who are both from media and worked in media, always say there's no chance in hell. I'm always curious why people do that. But it is our job to get people to talk. And the media has always played an incredibly important role. And when you go to countries where the media is controlled, like China, you see what happens there. So it's a double-edged sword.
That statement there is spoken as Snake Plissken would have spoken it.
Exactly. Very, very correct. This one goes directly to you, Phil. Joel, can you ask Phil? It's Phil, by the way, True Crime Phil. If the defense gets the full affidavit and knows there's a big stump with the evidence, will she, meaning the attorney, advise Mr. Kohberger to get a plea deal, as that is his only hope? Do you think they will try to get a plea deal, Phil?
Well, I don't know. That will be one of the options that they have. I will tell you that the defense will be provided everything. But the last thing they want to have happen here is to get into any kind of Brady or Morton violations in which there was exculpatory evidence, which means it's evidence that might prove that this defendant was not guilty. So they're going to provide everything, and make sure that we don't have those kinds of issues that might occur in terms of a plea deal. That will be something once they have the defense attorneys have examined the evidence against their client, and they will best advise them in the manner in which they think is in the best interest of their client. And this may, if the prosecution decides to pursue the death penalty, then the only other option that the defense is going to have in terms of offering a plea is going to be life with no parole. And that's going to be a question of whether or not the prosecution wants to consider that possibility. And then when these pleas are offered and negotiated and so forth and so on, at least in my experience in Harris County, Texas, the families are engaged from the prosecution side regarding the possible pleas and the possible options regarding those things. So in all of the cases that I've worked where a plea was taken, the families really have to give their blessing that they are good with that happening. So that's the same thing that's going to happen here. I don't think there's any big distinction between Idaho law and Texas statutes. I think that part of it, that's going to happen. Full disclosure to the defense, no Morton and Brady violations, and then we'll get down to possibly the discussion of a plea.
Shout out to Phil, who's saying hello from Denver. We've got Michelle in Cape Town, South Africa. We cover it all here. Marie Hernandez writes, integrity is so important in the media. Yes, it is. These cases are very distressing for everyone. I always tell people in the media, just be a good human being, and that's half the job. Marlena Cantu writes, it's like a game of give and take, but you can't take till the point that it interferes with an investigation. And then this comment from J. Thomas Reset, a friend of the show. From the first day, Scott, I'm going to toss this to you. I believe that whoever did this has done it before. Do you think BK had assistance or advice from an inexperienced killer? I mean, it does go back to the point that this was such a hideous crime. 4 people, middle of the night, stabbed to death, some in their sleep, some maybe not. And this is the first time this guy has ever committed this crime. What say you, Scott Duffy?
Yeah, of course I think of that. I know the investigators are thinking, what is this the first time? But there's a history to show that there are tremendous amounts of crazy stories, crimes, unimaginable murders, and it's a first for many. So I would take from that comment, right, was he a serial killer and turning and then of course comes across Idaho and caught. Going back to the early part of the show, you have a couple of different counties in Pennsylvania researching cold case homicides. There's no doubt that the evildoer's life has been gone over like a fine-tooth comb by investigators, and they're tracking vacations anywhere that they have this individual for any period of time, and are going through cold cases, right, with similar MOs, similar type of killings, and looking to see if they can develop some leads. There's no doubt that the DNA that has been, I would imagine by now, extracted by from the suspect has already been put into a database to see if there are going to be hits, right, through CODIS and other law enforcement databases, to see if any leads are generated. But I would be just like anybody else speculating, because of the horror of what has transpired in Idaho. It's hard to imagine it's a first, but at the same time, caught within a matter of 7 weeks, which is very good for law enforcement for this type of crime, especially for what we'll call a transient. In other words, he hasn't been in that location a whole period of time, 6 months or so. And kudos to them. And I could see this, in my opinion, being a first.
Christine Harvey writes, to Phil, spelled correctly. I love it. Maybe DM asked them to put it out as she feels the police department is portraying her in a way she isn't particularly pleased with. Back to our friend, Snake Plissken. I wonder why DM was the only one who made statements and the other girl hasn't been spoken of at all, which is true. We really have not heard from the other surviving roommate or anything about them. What do you make of this comment, Phil?
Well, we don't know what we don't know. And we don't know what statements were taken from the other witness says, plural. And what we do know is what was in the affidavit. So we keep going back to what we know because that's what has been put out there vis-a-vis this affidavit. So I don't know, and I'm not given to speculation. I just know that I'm sure there was a canvass of that neighborhood. There's no telling what kind of witnesses were derived from that canvass and what statements they may have made. I'm telling you, if this thing goes to trial, they're going to present the best of the evidence that they have. Doesn't mean they're going to show everything, but they're going to do an inventory, and they're going to put the best positive affirmative links that put the evildoer in that place at that time committing these horrific murders. So to speculate about what another witness may have said or didn't say, or this one statement that perhaps the DM asked the police, that just doesn't happen. I can tell you that if I had a family member or a witness that said, I want you to put this out to the media, I would have clamped that down the minute it came out of their mouth, because they're not managing the investigation, and they're reacting. If that were to have happened, they're reacting on an emotional level, and that's not the way you conduct an investigation or a successful prosecution. So the police department have not been painting this witness in any particular light. It has been the critics and these people on social media that think that they need to criticize, defame, and say ugly things about her, and they don't have any working knowledge about the investigation from the law enforcement side of it and what they know and this witness. So again, this is the results of the social media stuff, where we have these people sitting behind these screens that think that they can just type in anything they want to and never be held accountable. So I would just disallow any thought that she went to the police and said, please put this out because you guys are making me look bad. I just didn't happen.
Phil, pull the curtain back here because you've been in this situation. Let's say you were the lead investigator on this case. It happened November 13th. It's almost 3 months to the day right now. 3 months later, what is the lead investigator doing day to day? How engrossed are you still in it? I guess you could refer to one of your own cases 3 months later. Are you still thinking about it? Every waking moment? Are you still thinking, did I miss something? Are you still thinking, could there have been someone else involved? What is your mindset 3 months into a case of this magnitude?
I'm still letting the investigation has now begun. We have the arrest of the evildoer, and now we are getting together. We're putting together all the evidence. He's writing reports. That's the one thing he's doing. I tell you what, he's sitting down and he's maybe has gotten to the point where he can start putting some words to paper, start supplementing the original report with the investigation and what they have found and so forth and so on. So that's the inglorious part of being a homicide detective.
So is that like an office job now, literally sitting behind a computer?
That's sitting behind a monitor and a keyboard, and now you're starting to plug in all of this information and putting in some sort of continuity so that it makes sense. Because at least in Houston, what we would do, we put together what it was called a blue back. And it is all of the investigation. We had a framework and an outline, and we had tabs with each part: the synopsis of the case, the press release, the criminal histories of the people involved. Then you have the reports, then you have the supplements, you have the evidence that was gathered, the lab results. People would be shocked, I think, to even understand let's just talk a one body homicide.
Yeah.
that thing can be 2 volumes, depending on the complexity of the investigation. But when you're talking about 4 victims here.
Now I'm curious. So how much time are you spending writing these reports? And how are you balancing it with the rest of your job? Like, let's say another homicide call comes in and I mean, how are you doing all this?
That's just what I was going to say. So in the midst of all of that, and we had, and I'm sure it's probably similar around the country, but in homicide at HPD, we had a rotation. So I worked day shift. We had an evening shift, and we had a night shift. And we would rotate scenes. We had a board up, and there were representatives of each squad up there, the pairs. And when scenes came in, then it's first out. They get that scene. They go to the bottom. Then everybody moves up. And sometimes that can get crazy. I had a case that really stands out in my mind where in a period of about 5 days, I had a capital murder investigation, a murder investigation, and a kidnapping. That was just my partner and me. And you have to learn how to manage your cases. So once you have done what you've done, made the scene, then you have to start to categorize what are the priorities here, what piece of evidence is leading me here now. So you will have multiple investigations going. You've got so many plates spinning.
Now, don't be humble, Phil. If let's say it was a super high profile case, it happens. Are they jumping over the other people on the board and saying, Phil, go to this scene?
Well,
yes, ladies.
That happened a couple of times. That happened a couple of times because my partner and I, we weren't first out, but we got picked up and sent because of the scene itself. And so, yes, that did happen on occasion.
And just, I'm intrigued by this because this is the part that this is, like you said, the inglorious part. But now you write these reports. Any human can make mistakes. So is your partner proofreading it? Do you have to bring it to the chief? What's the pecking order here? Because I assume you're not just writing the report and then it goes straight to whoever the attorney handling the trial. It goes through several layers at the PD.
Well, there's once your blue back is completed, then it goes to your lieutenant. And I don't know if they're doing it that way now, but when I was there, it goes to your lieutenant for review. And he's not going to sit there and read. I mean, some of these reports are hundreds of pages. So, but he's going to go through and make sure that the boxes are checked in terms of, do we have everything in our categories? Do we have it filled? And if we don't have it, why is it not there? Because we don't always fill every one of those categories. So once that's done, then we take a copy of that. One copy goes to the file. The main copy goes to the file, the main case folder. And then the other copy goes to the district attorney's office for their review. And as I think most homicide cops do, they read and reread and review their reports, their supplements, to make sure that nothing is missed. So, and if there's a mistake made, then we go back and we get that corrected. Now, once that is all done, every supplement, at least in Houston, that's made, it goes to what is called staff review. So that is sent up to some very nice people that sit in that office all day long and do nothing but read homicide reports.
Wow.
And they categorize those. The UCR codes are assigned. That's the FBI reporting system. And if there is anything that is in the report that they think is a format problem or maybe something that needs to be questioned, then that will be brought back to the detective and is this what you meant? Is this and that and this and that? So in most of those cases, though, and then once the DAs review it, if there is something that's caught that looks like it's a contradiction, maybe it's a typo, maybe there's a time stamp or a date that was incorrectly entered, and it's a mistake, then we're made aware of that, and then we go back and we supplement that report as to the correction that we are about to make. So
Wow.
there's a check and balance to these investigations once they're submitted.
JDR just burst my bubble. I am living in an area with lots of Irish descendants. I can assure you there are lots of Michael Connollys who did not write books. So maybe it is not the writer of Bosch. But Scott, to you, another interesting piece of information we learned this week in the Brian Kohberger hashtag the evildoer saga. There was a statement put out from Washington State University, and I will read it directly. Mr. Kohberger does not currently have a teaching assistantship and is not currently enrolled at Washington State University. This coming from Phil Weiler, the school's vice president of marketing and communications. This comes because, again, News Nation was the first to report that he was fired from his position as this teacher's assistant shortly after the homicides. A former student said he seemed preoccupied, and this is what was interesting to me. His attitude towards women was cited as a key concern, with a criminal justice student allegedly having a quote-unquote sexist attitude toward females he interacted with at the school. You're the investigator on this case, Scott. How closely are you keeping an eye on this? Are you talking to all the students you may have come into contact with? What do you want to know from them?
Yeah, so that is another great lead for detectives to go out and not only head to the university and search warrant or subpoena, however they're getting through legal process, all documents related to his to any employment, and school records and transcripts, etc. They're building a case. They have 4 murders. They now have a suspect. They have physical evidence and witness statements, etc. And so this is where they put out information, what they're able to, in order to get other people generating information and possible leads. And so just as there was a story about the way that he treated certain bar customers back near home, same way with regards to how does he treat, whether it be treating women specifically or on campus or outside at different workplaces. So they're building a case, and they're also trying to figure out a motive and to build the evidence that goes into supporting that motive. And so if it's stalking, if it's something against specific to women, then they have to go out and gather all the intel that they have at their disposal. So it's not necessarily vital, but it is important in building what they have. They already have working theory of why he did this, etc. So anything that can support that outside is fantastic, and whether it will come out in trial, who knows? But it is definitely captured and going into a police report.
And for the public, the general public, that question is still unanswered. The 3-letter question, why, which is so fascinating. John Shepard writes, and I appreciate this comment. I might have to read it like 11 times. He says, "Thank you for another informative and honest show. Your show is the best show out there. Thank you. Please tell friends, everyone, and please hit that like button. That's the best thing you can do. And I always love having you, my hero, Phil, on there. Much admiration and respect for you both." And you got to add Scott into that. And I am no detective, Phil, but look at this. Snake Plissken, loose lips sink ships, as we said in the NYPD. Snake, if you're really a former NYPD, hit me up on our email link on my website, survivingthesurvivor.com. And we'll get Snake on one day with Phil and Scott to talk about your experience in the NYPD. Phil, back to the evil doer. He allegedly was being quote unquote rude to women, grading the women that he taught differently than the men, and having a quote unquote sexist attitude toward females he interacted with at the school. I mean, same question I just asked Scott. How important would this information, assuming it is true and accurate, would it be to you in your investigation?
Well, I've talked about before that my partner and I, we would conduct what we call a psychological autopsy. This would be part of that process. And anything, as Scott has already alluded to, that is important to put together who this person is and possibly get closer to the answer of why did he do what he did. Now, having said all of that, the why does not have to be proven. It's always the question that is most asked, but motive makes no difference in the prosecution. It doesn't make any difference what motivated him, except for the fact that it better explains to the detectives and to the prosecutors and to the general public, for that matter, and to the victims' families about why this occurred, because that's always the question, right? Always. When I'm sitting in the interview room and I'm talking to a murder suspect, getting them to make some admissions that they did it, that's the first thing we want to do. But then once they've done that, my next question is, why? Tell me what happened. What got you started on this path? And then let them talk. And at that point in time, in most cases, you can't shut them up. So all of this stuff that is going to be supplemental information to the evildoer's character, his personality, things that he was doing, is going to put more pieces into that psychological autopsy.
Christine Harvey writes that she is saying hello and wishing us well from Ireland. So we extend our demographic here all the way out to Ireland. Chris 10K writes, and Scott, I'm going to toss this one to you. Mr. Gonzalez, Kaylee's father, commented in an interview that Brian Kohberger was close enough to attach to the house Wi-Fi, I believe referring to the 12 times he was in that area. Or there. Is this as important as the cell tower ping, Scott?
Yeah, so if you can show, so that's where all the technological pieces are being put together with regards to if that's actual information where you have his device. I'm guessing a laptop or his phone that is close enough, whether close enough on the outside or being on the inside, and that they're able to capture that device. I mean, that's fantastic, as long as they're able to show the links between what shows up in a router. Or other device that is able to capture the IP addresses, etc., and be able to put a phone or whatever device that they can trace back to BK for sure. Anything like that, as the cell tower, etc. This is the technological advancement to investigations today that are just another great piece of evidence. Very much like DNA and fingerprint.
Phil is wearing his Hawaiian shirt. It's Friday. He was calm. I wanted to agitate him, so I put this comment up from Sean Sullivan. Detective Phil does not know what's up with DM. If he thinks DM is a great witness, just wait till a good defense attorney gets to cross-examine her. Your response, Phil? Take it easy on Sean Sullivan.
Well, look, I mean, I'm sure Sean has investigated multiple homicides in his life, and I don't believe. Can you put that back up there again? Let me see
sorry.
what he said specifically there.
Yeah.
doesn't know what's up with DM, well, I'll agree. I don't know what's up with that witness, other than what I've seen in the affidavit and what we have just discussed in general terms here. So he's correct. If he thinks DM is a great witness, I don't think I ever said that I think she's a great witness. I think what I have said is that she is a witness. So, and just wait till a good defense attorney gets her cross-examination. It really will make, because the defense attorney, if it happens, if the trial happens, and they put her on the stand, and I would hope that there will be no cameras in that courtroom. I am opposed to live broadcasts of trials. I think that is this Murdaugh thing and the whole bit. But anyway, and when she is put on the stand, a good defense attorney will have to be very cautious about beating up that witness, because if he wants to destroy his defense, just start beating up that witness in front of that jury, and let's see how far that gets you. So, Deshaun, okay.
I knew Phil would make a bunch of salient points there, and the best one, I think, was about that defense attorney trying to tear her up. You got to be careful there. And Sean, Phil won't say it, but I'll say it. Come back after you've investigated 400 homicide cases. On to Papa Bear. I live in Moscow, Pullman area. Papa Bear, we're thinking of you. Hope you guys are recovering there. Love your show, Joel. We love you. Do your guests predict the trial will be delayed? It's got to be delayed till 2022. After that, because it's 2023 now, or until 2023. Waiting is understandable, but hard on families and community. I think the question here, Scott, is how far off is the trial? And if you're the district attorney, and you're trying to get all this stuff in order, and you're the defense, and it's such a high profile case, how much time are you looking for before you actually get to the business of the courtroom?
Well, I think it all comes down to the rules of procedure, et cetera, for the state, right? And on the Fed side, I've seen, unfortunately, some of my cases take 2 or 3 years, but that's not without the defense's cooperation, constantly waiving, initially to waive your right to a speedy trial. But there's a lot of behind the scenes that are never going to come out, that are happening with the judge and both parties, both sides, where there may be let's just say summertime. They're gonna put it on the roster or on the schedule. Hey, let's have an initial trial date. And Mike and Phil can definitely attest to this, most working state cases, but those initial trial dates are simply put on a calendar because you have to, and then one side or the other is requesting a delay. And typically I've never really run across a prosecutor's never going to go against the defense, and vice versa with regards to yet getting another delay in the case to either vet out a piece of evidence or whatnot. So and victims and the victims' families are all in the know of this, right? It is frustrating, but ultimately both sides want to get it right. The judge definitely wants to make sure that it is right prior to an actual scheduling of a trial date that actually calls in a jury pool, and then you can have a lengthy time selecting a jury. So it's I mean, I'm looking at 2023. I'd still be hesitant if that actually happens before we're already into mid-February.
And I can tell you, we're covering another case very closely, the Dan Markel murder case. He was murdered in 2014. 2 hitmen were hired and convicted, as well as the intermediary. And 9 years later, the ex-brother-in-law is about to stand trial. So sometimes the wheels of justice turn slowly, and we're going to get Scott and Phil back on to talk about that. There's one more thing I kind of want to get to and a few more questions, and then we'll let the gentleman go. Kim Possible writes, random. I just saw Phil on TV in a new episode of ID's See No Evil. His commentary is always insightful. It's not so random. Phil is a massive star, seen everywhere, but his loyalties align with Surviving the Survivor. He would give up everything else for Surviving the Survivor. Followed by this question here from Meg P. Phil, and I'm curious about this too. I think I've even asked you. So Meg and I think alike. Phil, knowing what you know as a detective now, do you become suspicious of certain people that you meet just by their actions?
Well, I guess the short answer would be yes. I do. When I meet somebody for the first time, I do an assessment based on my training and experience. It's just something that I guess at this point I do. You know, I've always tell people that it's my occupation was not a homicide detective. It's what I was. So it's not what I did. It's what I was and what I am. But so, yes, I mean, there's a little bit of that in carryover. When I meet someone new, I do a quick assessment, and then I keep my observations to myself as we continue on through the conversation. So yes.
So the other interesting thing here, Brittany Hislop, she's been reported largely once again by News Nation, but other media outlets have picked up on this person. No one can actually verify whether or not she's real, but she's interesting because she claims to be a single mother with a 16-year-old child, 35 years old, and she has been posting on Facebook about her infatuation with Brian Kohberger. And she wrote, my love interest is named Brian and is accused of murder, and I just wish to connect with him above anyone else. One way to describe my feelings for him over the last week or so is kind of like being lovesick. Scott, we just had Kerry Rawson on. That's BTK's, the infamous serial killer's daughter. And she says BTK is constantly getting mail in prison from quote unquote fans. My question to you, what's the matter with people? You got this woman, if she's real, why the hell is she writing to Brian Kohberger? What is going on with these people, as Seinfeld would say?
Yeah, I don't think there is any individual in history, or at least recent history with serial killers and violent criminals, Charles Manson, the same. You have people coming out of the woodwork. It goes to show you just how depraved humanity can be, desperate, whatnot. But yeah, there are plenty of criminals convicted who doing their time who have plenty of pen pals, and there are all sorts of things that are sent to prisons, and it's I'm amazed every time, but I'm not shocked by it. So I can absolutely believe if this person is real, or whether the name's real or not. Definitely, there are individuals beyond that I can imagine if they haven't yet written to him, they will be, and many across not only this nation but others, where people who are in jail for their crimes, and people are fascinated to be able to either have a love interest or whatever connection they find. It's just over and over again.
We had a technical name that we referred to people like this, and we would refer to them as freaking nuts.
Phil, have we become so celebrity obsessed in this nation, with Beyonce and whoever else and TMZ, that now people are so desperate for their 15 minutes that they want to be associated with a killer? Is that what's going on here, in your opinion? Or are people just crazy?
Oh, I think it's a little bit of both. This woman here that's popped up and with this nonsense. The only thing different here is that she gets on social media, and here she is, and everybody look at me. I'm the latest. I'm the flavor of nut today, and so this is not uncommon. And Scott's already said it. Look, you go back to the serial killers that we've known. Gary Speck, the guy that killed the nurses, stabbed 8 nurses. I think it was 8 nurses to death in I believe the Chicago area, if I'm not mistaken. But that was decades ago. And he had people writing to him and look, these people, there are people out there that have this need, I guess, to be associated with these people that have committed these horrific acts for whatever that reason is. I mean, you'd have to talk to those people to determine what it is about it. But there are just people out there that want to be caught up in that, and they write these people and try to have some sort of a relationship. And some of them go as far as, some of these people that are in prison, marrying these people, going and visiting them, and so forth and so on. So I mean, I guess that to those people, I guess it's just the affirmation that there's someone for everyone.
Elizabeth Ramsey writes, love how Phil says evildoer. So do I. Shivani comments here. Scott, this one's for you. What might happen if Ann Taylor, the public defender, finds Kohberger, or the evildoer, to be uncooperative, uncommunicative in working with her for his own defense? What would happen in that situation?
Well, I've had a few cases where the accused wants to represent himself, and of course it makes it very difficult for the judge. It makes it difficult for all the parties to move forward, because an attorney ultimately is there for your own good, to guide you through the legal process, all the ins and outs, to give you sound advice, neutral advice, and to help you make your own decisions going forward, pleading, not pleading, whatever have you. But if this were to be true, and this person would he would remain uncooperative and ultimately wanting to be a pro se attorney, defend himself, be his own attorney, et cetera, it will lengthen the process. It becomes somewhat of a spectacle, but it wouldn't be good for him not to assist in his own defense and giving a sound attorney everything that is needed to guide him through the process. So it would be bad. That's ultimately what would happen, for him to remain uncooperative and uncommunicative. It just wouldn't work out well for him.
Yeah. Lourdes G writes, how disturbed you have to be attracted to the evildoer. I would have to agree with that. Now, I don't want to victim shame, and I don't want to beat up on any of the surviving roommates. However, I find this question interesting from My Knit Saloon, Phil. Do you know another case where a survivor or someone spared in the same house as the murdered waited 7 to 8 hours before calling 911 and first call friends over? And what did the prosecutor and jury think? Phil, starting with you, and then Scott, you as well, I guess. Have you ever had a case where someone did freeze and there was a long period of time before 911 was called, or is this sort of an outlier, this case?
I don't recall in my own personal experience having a case like that. I'd say this is a unique part of this case, but again, I would have to believe that there is an explanation for it. And again, this is something I'm not going to speculate on. I'm just going to wait and see if this is something that is revealed in the trial, if that trial occurs.
You might hear my little girl Ethel barking in the background. She knows it's Friday. Same to you, Scott. Have you had a case where there's been a really long lag time between the crime and the 911 call?
No, I can't recall any that's coming to mind with regards to something similar like this, where the ultimate caller, the 911 caller, is waiting for a lengthy period of time. But I will say, with regards to, a lot of not only members of the audience but elsewhere commenting on the witness, and the strange aspects to this. I really believe that's only because, first and foremost, law enforcement is forbidden to provide other details. And law enforcement, I think, already has that information, which probably would put all this to rest. But they are simply using specific information that is useful to building the affidavit, but are just not going to get into all the other aspects of the why, or why has the witness taken so long. So I would believe that law enforcement has that. They're not going to reveal it. They're not allowed to reveal it, and then hence, people across the nation speculating, which is something that is unique, as Phil had said. But I do believe law enforcement knows, and it would resolve a lot of the speculation as to the amount of time.
Coop 3000, who has become a friend of the show, writes, not uncommon, and I believe Coop might be an attorney, not uncommon to call someone else before calling 911 in all sorts of situations. Phil, someone wrote in that we need to call 911 and report Jonathan Gilliam missing. Are you concerned? Do we need to file a missing persons report on Jonathan Gilliam?
I have spoken with Jonathan. I have broken bread with Jonathan in the last few days. Jonathan is alive and well. He is just very, very busy.
Well, and this next comment here, I did not know. D, love of God, and we're going to wrap it up in a moment here, but Ethan's brother and sister, he's a triplet, one of three, were two of the friends called. I cannot imagine seeing the victims and how they need to recover and grieve. Scott, we talked about that. Just imagine being a triplet and being called to the house. I can't even think of what that must have been like. But the man in the hoodie, it looks like he's wearing an FBI hood. I can't really tell, with your name on it, which is cool. Is Agent Scott Duffy. He is now the director of Wilmington University's Criminal Justice Institute. He's retired an FBI special agent. Prior to the FBI, he served 5.5 years as a Pennsylvania police officer. Someone writes here, Zen Amen writes here, no one can imagine any part of this horrendous crime. I'd have to agree with you. Any final thoughts today, Scott, regarding this case and what you are looking for next, if anything? I think you said it'd be at least the end of 2023 before the trial would start. Is that correct?
Yeah, and there hasn't been a date that I'm familiar with, right? And typically, a date at some point is going to be posted for a trial day, and that will be the initial date. And so whatever the next step is, with regards to evidentiary hearings, et cetera, there will be a date ultimately put on the docket, and just to always be in accordance with whatever the rules and procedures of the state of Idaho. And so I foresee, just as I was never part of where of the belief that, wow, it took 7 weeks to find this individual. I was always believed that's super fast, and that's great police work. And so knowing the court systems, pretty much across the board, these are timely, and in due time, there will be a court date. There will be a trial, and so patience ultimately is what I think we are called to.
Patience is a virtue. Lennart Forsberg, who's a friend of the show, writes, Scott Duffy, there's an E in there, by the way, Duffey, looks almost like Johnny Grusing, another FBI agent we've had on. Both of them handsome, smart, and very deliberate in how they deliver their information. Johnny Grusing's a very interesting guy who was an awesome college basketball player for Texas Tech, Phil Waters. And speaking of Phil Waters, he is, as I say, America's most respected detective, 23 years as a homicide detective. I already forgot that guy's name who was criticizing you. But after you spend 23 years as a homicide detective and you work more than 400 homicide cases, I will listen to you over Phil once you've done that. But until then, I will listen to Phil. He is also a Marine and the owner of Kindred Spirits Investigations and the star of so many shows, too many to count, but one of them is The Interrogator. Phil, any final words of wisdom regarding the evildoer and the Idaho case here as we move forward?
Well, I just think it's time to back away from this thing. I think it's time to quit putting up every source that pops up with something that gins everybody all up again and creates a bunch of speculation that nobody has any direct knowledge of. And I think I've heard that the next hearing date is in June sometime. I don't know, that may be another case, but I'm thinking it's June 26th or something like that on this case.
Yeah, June 26th.
And I think that given some time, Scott talked about time, and I think that is a good thing in this case because maybe it will allow the dust to settle a little bit and lets everybody just calm down, let the process work as it should. The prosecution is going to ask for a trial date when they and the defense are ready to proceed. So this is a two-lane highway we're on. And I think that given some time, it may serve well the prosecution ultimately, because remember, he, under the Sixth Amendment again, he gets a fair trial. What does that mean? We got to put a jury together that has not been nullified by all the sensational stuff that's been going on and all the talking heads. And so I think that there needs to be a little bit of buffer of time in there, just maybe to tamp some of this down. And of course, then we all know that when the trial starts, if it does, then it will all get ratcheted right back up again. We'll have the same stuff. It'll just be Groundhog Day because we'll all be talking about the same stuff all over again. So I would just say that in a general sense, I'm going to use the word that Scott used because I think it's perfect, is patience. Be patient. That's what I teach in the interview room, and that's what I would teach about a case like this, is people just need to be patient and let it unfold, and hopefully it will culminate into a successful prosecution on this person, on this evildoer who's presumed innocent at this point in time.
The word of the day is patience, and D. Love of God writes, yes, Phil, let justice work. I echo that sentiment. We will have to wait and see. Quick programming note, we will be coming to you live on Sunday, Super Bowl Sunday, with my lovely mother. The topic yet to be determined, the time yet to be determined, because she's a bit of a diva and I have to corral her, but I will tweet out the time and the topic. But Carm will be live on Sunday. Love you, America.